Peter in Scottsdale, Arizona. Hey, Peter, what's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going, Tom? Here's what's on my mind. This is in reference to the guest you had talking about the death penalty.
Mike Farrell.
And the death penalty typically, correct me if I'm wrong, is typically a liberal / Democrat stance to get rid of the death penalty. Is that correct?
I would say pretty much since, I mean, Bill Clinton was in favor of the death penalty. In fact, when he was campaigning in '92 for the presidency, he paused his campaign for a day to fly down to Arkansas to pull the switch on a guy who, as Mike Farrell pointed out, was so severely mentally retarded that he had set aside his cake from his last meal so that he could eat it when he came back to his cell after going to the death chamber. So the Democratic Party, you know, when it was Clinton's Democratic Party, was pro-death penalty. But I would, and I'm not sure on Obama's watch, he didn't really do anything about that. But I would argue, Peter, that the Democratic Party that is reforming itself right now is going to be more pro-life. Yeah. And by the way, the pro-life movement is what they used to call the anti-death penalty movement before the abortion people hijacked it.
You know, in essence, you know, the problem is the chance that you might accidentally kill an innocent person, therefore negates the whole process.
Right, and we know it's happened. In fact, we know that Rick Perry did it in Texas. We know who the guy is. I mean, I can't remember his name now, but we did several shows about it. This guy who was convicted of killing his wife and 2 daughters in a fire in his house, and they said it was arson, and he set the house on fire. They executed him, and then they discovered that the arson investigator who had said this, just routinely signed off on these things, and they brought a real arson investigator in, and he said, no, this was an electrical fire. And the guy was mourning. I mean, you know, he had come home from a bar or something, and the house was on fire, and he couldn't get into it to save his wife and two daughters, and they died. And then they arrested him, put him in prison, and then they executed him. You know, Rick Perry executed him. And I mean, it's just a horrible story, but it really illustrates the death penalty in America.
Yeah. So my question is then, how can somebody that's anti-death penalty for criminals or people in prison, maybe they're not, maybe they're innocent, how can someone who's anti-death penalty for someone in prison simultaneously be pro-death penalty for an unborn baby?
Well, I don't think you'll find anybody who's in favor of killing unborn babies. To be an unborn baby, you'd have to be in the last month of a pregnancy to be that viable that you'd call it a baby. I think the debate, Peter, is when does life begin? Is a blob of tissue that, you know, is less than a quarter inch long, or even, you know, smaller than the head of a pin, is how it starts out. Is that human life, or is that something that can become human life? And
well, I mean, that is an undisputable fact that is human life. Nobody argues that.
Well, I would argue that.
Okay. Is it a dog life, or is it a banana's life? Is it a...
Well, it's human tissue.
Red hot chili peppers?
It's obviously human tissue, but you know, if you're removing a piece of human tissue that has the potential to become another person, I mean, how is that different from you know, removing a testicle that is filled with sperm that has the potential to become a human person?
Because a testicle will never be developed into a human being, a live human being like you and I.
Well,
so how many?
You know, an implanted egg, or a fertilized and implanted egg, won't always develop into a human being either. About 1 out of 4 pregnancies ends up with a miscarriage. But you know, it's the argument, Peter. You're not going to convince me, and I'm not going to convince you. I am of the opinion, personally. I'm just speaking for myself.
I'm open-minded. I know I'm very open-minded to it. Maybe you will convince me.
I think that Roe v. Wade, you know, while I think that it was wrong what the Supreme Court did, they should not have created legislation, which is what they did. They defined 3 trimesters. They said there's different rules for each one of these 3 trimesters, and that's now the law of the land. That's the job of a legislature. That's not the job of the Supreme Court. And frankly, if Roe had not happened, if the Supreme Court had not ruled that way, I'm pretty sure that given the direction that America was moving in 1973, it was just 11 years after the birth control pill had been legalized, and women's suffrage, basically, you know, women in the workplace, women in political power was really starting to happen. I think over the next decade or so, you would have had this happen state after state after state legislatively, and we would have achieved a consensus, and there wouldn't have been all these dead abortion doctors, and there wouldn't have been this absolute bloody, screaming fight between Americans over this issue. No. But I could be wrong. My original point was that with in the Roe decision, basically they said in the first trimester, it's still a piece of tissue. You know, it has no sentence. It has it's not a living, our definition of living, obviously. But, that during that first trimester, it's really a part of a woman's body and she can do what she wants with it. During the second trimester, before she can get rid of that, she's got to come up with some really seriously good excuses, some good reasons. And during the third trimester, she can't do it at all unless she's going to die as a consequence of not doing it. And that's what Roe laid out, and that seems to me quite reasonable, actually.
No, I was just going to ask you that. So during the second trimester, that's universal through. I'm serious. I'm not being a smartass.
Yeah.
That's universal. That at that point there has to be some kind of serious issue in order for it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Go back and read the Roe decision. Okay. Yeah, and most states have tightened it up even tighter than that. So in all your Republican states and several of the Democratic-controlled states, it's a hell of a lot harder to get an abortion, even with a reasonably good excuse, in the second trimester. It's just first. And
go ahead. And so it's the first 3 months it's relatively easy. The second 3 months it's very difficult, and I imagine the subsequent 3 months it's even. It's
virtually impossible. I mean, the so-called partial birth abortions, these are never used for birth control purposes. This is when you've got a baby that is dead or dying or so badly deformed that it's going to be born in insane pain and die 6 hours later. I mean, that's why they do those kinds of procedures. And as women have testified to in numerous op-eds over the years. So, this issue has been demagogued like crazy, in large part because of 1980. In 1979, Ronald Reagan was pro-abortion. He signed the most liberal abortion law in the United States as governor of California. He was all in favor of women being able to have an abortion if they wanted, pretty much under any circumstances. George Herbert Walker Bush in 1979 was a lifetime donor to Planned Parenthood, and it was one of the causes that he spoke for and to frequently. And what happened was in '79, as a result of the '73 Roe v. Wade decision, the other thing that happened in 1979 was that the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Church, sued the United States government in federal court, saying that the Hyde Amendment, which had been passed, I believe, in '77 or '78, which said that the federal government, no federal money can be used to pay for abortion. The Southern Baptists sued the federal government, saying that by adopting the Hyde Amendment, the federal government had violated the Establishment of Religion clause in the Constitution that says that the federal government may not create a state religion. They said that essentially what the Hyde Amendment did was establish Catholicism, or at least Catholic doctrine about abortion, as the law of the land in the United States, and that's wrong. That was 1979. At the end of toward the end of 1979, Jerry Falwell, alone, he was Southern Baptist, pretty much alone, decided this abortion thing really has legs. This is something that I can ride. This is something we can really make hay with. And he got together with Randall Terry and a bunch of other guys who were anti-abortion guys, and within 6 months swung the evangelical movement. He had several of his evangelical televangelist buddies, Jim Baker, and there was another one, I'm forgetting his name. All three of them decided that they were going to go anti-abortion in '79. So in 1980, at the beginning of that campaign year, when Reagan and Bush were on the Republican ticket, both of them changed their position on abortion. And abortion then became basically a political issue. And Jerry Falwell and Randall Terry rode this thing to the tune of millions of dollars of personal income and tens of millions of dollars of institutional income. And it has been politicized ever since. And as I said, in the beginning of our conversation, I think in large part because the Supreme Court should not have legislated from the bench. Have I made sense, Peter?
No, absolutely. No, it is. You're like an encyclopedia. This is, or whatever.
Well, I'm writing a book right now on the Supreme Court. And yesterday, I finished writing the chapter on Roe v. Wade. So,
no, it's because of my perception. And again, like I am not pretending to know everything or anything like that. Is the perception is generally that these abortions are easy to get at any time. I mean, whether that's saying that or whether it's just not the.
That's the demagoguery. That's the lie that is promoted by people who are not sincerely trying to prevent abortions, but are using it for political purposes. Because the fact of the matter is, if you look at the statistics, if you look at reality, in this case, Peter. What you find is that the states with the loosest abortion laws, where it's the easiest for a woman to get an abortion, and with the largest number of abortion clinics, have the lowest rate of overall abortions. And, which seems counterintuitive. But the reason why is because those states that have easy access to abortion also have easy access to birth control and to prenatal care. Right. Women find out that they're pregnant earlier because they go in and get tested because it's easy and available to them, and they use birth control more regularly. And because those are all in the same place. Planned Parenthood offers all three of those things. So as a consequence, women don't get pregnant to begin with, and if they do get pregnant, they've got good prenatal care, they're less likely to have an abortion. So, when Bill Clinton was running in '92, and he said he wants to, yes, I'm opposed to abortion too, but, he didn't want to make it illegal. He said, I want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. And in fact, the position that I just laid out of having full access to abortion under the terms defined by Roe v. Wade actually reduces abortions. Whereas when you look at a state like Mississippi, where abortion is almost impossible to get, they have one of the highest rates in the country of abortions. They're just not legal, and therefore they have the highest rate in the country of women dying as a consequence of pregnancy. So it's like, we've got this all upside down, and Jerry Falwell and his buddies started all this in 1979 in order to get rich and famous, and I think it's just wrong. Peter, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you. Tim in Belle Plaine, Iowa. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Personal story, our first child gestated 42 weeks, perfect condition. We lost that child during delivery due to complications. The state of Illinois gave us neither a birth certificate nor a death certificate.
Right.
It is settled law. It is not a child.
That's right. Okay. It's not a child until it's born, legally.
That's right.
That's
right. Has to take a breath.
Okay, so was that your... And by the way, this was the position of the Catholic Church up until 200 years ago. It was, at various times, different, abortion was allowed at different points. But it was called quickening, and then there was inspire, right? Breath, the first breath, right. Thus the word inspiration. And there was the whole doctrine of inspiration, the child, but anyhow, that's not, that was more than 200 years ago. Tim, thanks for the call and for
Thank you for your time.
Sure, and for contributing to the conversation.